So in this video, we're going to go through the lookups area within admin. So within admin, you have this lookups icon that's under the system row, and access to the lookups area is on the basis of a user group permission. So within user group permissions, under the admin permissions group, you've got this lookups section here, and if that's set to full access, then you'll be able to see lookups as an option within the admin area. Now, a lookup is a field that contains a drop-down value set of values where you can select one of those values to represent that field ultimately. So what we'll do is we'll go through the process of looking at those different lookups and how you administer them and the different options that are available within that area. So clicking on lookups and going into candidate status as an example, what you can see here is the different codes that are available, and obviously on the left hand side all the different lookup values that are in place as well. Now on selection of a code, you'll see that there are three essentially key points to go through. One is description, which is ultimately the name of the code. The other one is default, which is to specify whether or not that code is the default value that is held within that field when the record is created. The other option is sequence. So sequence is the scenario where you want to reorder the change or reorder the positioning of the code within the lookup value, within the lookup. So if you want to make a certain value the first one in the list, say, then you can obviously specify a sequencing order there to put it at the top. So moving on to custom lookups. So this is for the scenario when you have a custom field that you want to set as a lookup list. Within the custom lookups area, you would create a new lookup and assign it as a parent, which would be just the name of the custom field. And then within the parent, underneath that as children assigned, then you've got the different lookup lists that you would assign against that. And then when you're within the custom fields area, you'd reference the custom field parent associated to that custom field, and that's how you're able to assign and create custom field lists. So within you here, you create your custom field lists for use. Moving on to document types to list out the different additions that are there. So with document types, there are some extras to take into account. The first one being that you've got a CV type. So you have the same three main values to begin with, but then you've got CV type, and CV type is a signifier as to whether or not the document is associated with a CV, and that's used for the latest CV function that's off the candidate record on the Documents tab. Default for parsing is the default document type that is assigned to a CV as you're parsing it into the system. So that's an important one there. Allow API access is essentially when you're a third party using the API to look at documents against a record, whether or not you want to make that document visible to the API. And then the last one is default index, which is important for searching against documents, and you want to assign an index associated with that document type so that you can specify that index when you're searching and it knows to look against all document types associated with that index and include it in the searching. So that covers document types. So moving along to history codes. So with history codes, you have essentially the same set options, but also some additional categories. But if I just quickly touch on the padlocks that you'll see against different lookup codes. So the padlocks represent system lookup codes. They're essentially codes that are linked with workflow within the system. So they're basically hard-coded lookup codes. You'll notice that when you click on a lookup code that doesn't have a padlock, then you've got that delete lookup option. And obviously, you can add new lookups from the plus sign. But when you're clicking on a padlock-based lookup, that delete option is then removed as an option. You also have these additional options that are now available within the history code section. But if I go to telephone as our example, history code is a good example of regularly used history code. Looking at allow selection, I mean, obviously you've got the description, default, and sequence there, but allow selection being the first one that's different. What allow selection means is it means that the code is available in this drop-down list when you're creating a history. So if you want that history code to be available in that drop-down list, that allow selection needs to be set to yes. In terms of update so update last contacted, that's this field that is present on the record here, last contacted, and it's basically if you create a history against the record using that history code, do you want that field to be updated? So it's mainly for corresponding history codes that you want to have that there. You've got an allow edit and allow delete as well. That's an option available for history. So with certain note type history codes, it might be appropriate to be able to edit that, return to it and edit it. But for things like email, it's obviously not appropriate to then edit those histories. So you've got an option to set that to yes based on the history code setting. And obviously you have an allow deletion one as well, which is again as an option of that create history off the history toolbar. But both those settings, they can be set against the history codes, but whether or not the user has the ability to do that is dependent on their user group permissions. So within user group permissions under global as a permission group, you have the ability to edit history items there and the ability to delete history items as well. So providing that those are set to full access, the actual physical workflow of being able to edit and delete will then be used. And you've got some including reporting options, yes, no options as to whether or not activity reporting factors in those history codes as well. So the last point to cover is skill categories. Although skills visibly are quite different within the UI, ultimately they are listed within the lookups area. And you define this by creating lookups and then setting whether or not there are, as a type, a parent or a child. And you basically define the parents against the children, and that essentially creates a tree structure, which is your skills library. Within the skills area, you have a key setting called including parsing. And what that does is basically ensure that the skills within that skill folder are checked when you are parsing a CV and looking for different skills within that CV. So you need to make sure that that is set to yes if you want those skills to be checked as part of parsing. And we also have an area called skills alias. Within skills alias, it allows you to specify different naming conventions representing that skill. So if you have a certain skill which is known as many other naming conventions, then if you enter those in as skills aliases, then those will also be checked as part of the parsing process. And if it finds that skill alias, it will appoint the associated skill to the record as part of the parsing. So that covers skill categories, and that covers ultimately lookup maintenance within Colleague 7.